we tried to document some of this stuff. And then I started to come up with new kinds of profiles of crimes and profiles of attacks. So there was, I started categorizing them in my head: the Merrill Lynch factor, the John Deutsch factor, the Shack factor. Anybody familiar with the Shack case? Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty. This is an animal rights group which was concerned with, the cruelty to animals, the torture and use of animals in scientific research. And they weren't getting anywhere with Huntington Lab, this lab in England, so they started targeting their providers. So they got the insurance provider to drop them as an insurance client, and then they got the accounting firm, global accounting firm, to drop them as a client, and they were very effective. How did they do this? They did it with denial of service. They did it with distributed DOS attacks. They did it with voicemail hacking. They did it with website hacking. They did it with physical harassment. It was a fascinating case. And then there was Operation CEO, which was an early tip-off about identity theft, the hybrid crime of identity theft and hacking, where this ex-con who was a busboy in Brooklyn was, had established identities as Ross Perot, as Oprah, as dozens of the most famous, powerful, and wealthiest people in the world. And this was an early indication of what identity theft was going to be like. In the Hansen case, so I called it the Hansen factor. This was where not only was an FBI agent betraying his country, but he was betraying his country, the ultimate insider. An FBI agent betraying his country, but he was betraying his country. He was posing as a computer security expert within the FBI and intentionally hacking into systems to show they were unsafe, while he was selling digital secrets to the Russians. So that with all these kind of factors, I was trying to organize ways to look that you could see that you really had to think outside the box of what crime in the 21st century was going to look like. So by the end of this period of time, I had this checklist of false notions about cybercrime, and they were it was almost everything that I was hearing in the popular media turned on its head. For instance, that cybercrime costs are exaggerated, that cybercrime was a rare occurrence, that insiders were 80% of the problem and outsiders were only 20% of the problem. And this particular thought form was so pervasive that I even read myself quoted as saying this. So in other words, the thought form was so pervasive that you could tell a reporter that no, it's not that 80% of the problem is insiders and 20% of the problem is outsiders, but they would hear it anyway because they couldn't accept that it was anything else. Well, people would say to me at that time, they said, well, what is it then? I said, well, it's more like 80-80. 80% of the problem is insiders, 80% of the problem is outsiders. It's trickier than that. Another one was that the problem was mostly juvenile hackers. Another one was that economic espionage was done almost exclusively by the turning of insiders. And then there were misconceptions about the nature of security programs, like that technology was security, that policies and awareness posters were security, that budget, that really the secret was budget, that if you had enough budget you could have security, or that it was some combination thereof that provided security. And all these things were, to me, failing to get the big picture. So I developed this list of false notions about security, and this is the way that, to me, the arc of my thinking was going, and then 9/11 happened. And, on 9/11, there's two things I always say about 9/11, and people say, well, what does that have to do with cybercrime? I said, cybersecurity or cyber risk. I said, well, we're talking about risk. And really we're talking about security. Cyber is a vector or a dimension of risk. You can no longer just talk about computer security as if it's something separate from everything else. And the two things about 9/11, there's three big lessons to me from 9/11. that I will keep talking about until they turn the mute button on with me. And the first one is that the world did not change on 9/11. Some people woke up to what the world was like on September 10th, but the world did not change on 9/11. And the second one is that we had a tremendous opportunity to raise the awareness of people and educate people. And by educating and raising the awareness of people, I mean empowering them, not scaring them, not making them afraid or making them feel totally dependent on some greater power outside of themselves, but empowering them to understand, to do their own risk analysis in their own lives, to do their own crisis management and business, continuity planning in their own lives, to do the kind of work in their own psyche that they needed to do to live in a dangerous time. We had a tremendous opportunity, and we really haven't taken advantage of that opportunity. And the third thing from 9/11 is that it was not an intelligence breakdown. This is the other thing you always hear. The world changed on 9/11. No, it didn't. 9/11 was the fault of intelligence breakdown. No, it wasn't. There was plenty of intelligence. The problem was what happened with that intelligence. The problem was farther up the food chain. So after 9/11, I decided I wanted to be operational, and I wanted also to think about things beyond just the narrow scope, to think about cybercrime and related security risks beyond the narrow scope of the Computer Security Institute. And so I went to work in the private sector, and I'm going to share 3 stories from the private sector, and they're generic, but they're real stories, and they explain something about what's broken. Because the point of this talk, more than anything, is we were very right 10 years ago about how bad things would be today in cyberspace. We were largely very right. What is stunning to me is how little good has come out of the last 10 years in terms of cyberspace. And the one thing that I want you to walk away with is a version of why that is. So this is now, let's think about a global corporate entity. If you assume this story is about me and you assume this story is about where I worked, you could be wrong. So don't go there. This is a true story, but the names have been changed. You have a global security and awareness program targeted for the total workforce. There are things that everybody should know. There are things the IT professionals should know, the human resources professionals should know, the executives and their support staff should know. I won't go down into the mechanics of how it was done and the ways in which it was done, but this was the basic concept: to target the groups of people and give them the kind of information. Awareness and education for the total workforce is one thing. Awareness and education for an IT professional is another. And so this global awareness program had what I call the 3 E's. You engage people with awareness, you enlighten them, and you empower them. And the third, and it also had the second set of 3 E's, which is that it was economical, efficient, and effective. And this particular global organization, this awareness and education program, was also canceled. Why? Well, to tell that story, we'll go to another story. In the same vector of time, this particular organization was undergoing a series of social engineering attacks from all over the world. Somebody was calling, literally, this organization's offices and operations all over the world, trying to elicit information about a certain group of people within that organization. A couple of the calls were successful. A counterintelligence operation was conducted. Analysis was done.